If change is hard because of habits, it's best that we understand how habits are created and how they work. There's this wonderful book called The Habit Cycle, or The Power of Habit, by Charles Duhigg, who's a New York Times reporter, that goes into neuroscience of habit and gives great examples from individuals and corporations about how this habit cycle works and how you can use it to influence change, to get people to change. And the habit cycle is actually very easy. It's 3 steps. There's a cue, there's a routine, and a reward. The cue is something that triggers you to do something. So, for instance, on your way to work, you walk by a donut shop. You look in the window and you see these delicious chocolate-covered donuts. That's the cue. So you walk into the shop and you buy the donut and eat it. That's the habit. All right? Then there's the reward. You get that sweet taste in your mouth and the subsequent sugar rush. And after you do this a few times, that habit gets baked into your reptilian brain. This goes for everything. So exercise, on a more positive note. My alarm clock rings in the morning, I get up, and these days, reflexively, I put on my exercise clothes, and I go out and do my exercise. I don't think about it, it happens. My reward are the endorphins that get released, after I exercise. So let's bring this habit cycle into the world of organizations where we live and breathe every day. A great example from the book, The Power of Habit, has to do with Alcoa. In 1987, when Paul O'Neill was appointed CEO of Alcoa, the company was not doing terribly well. Its finances were in the toilet, there was a lot of unrest in the unions and the workers, and safety was at abysmally low. Now, when they held a press conference to announce Paul O'Neill, all the financial reporters were expecting him to say what most new CEOs say of a struggling company. We're going to cut costs, we're going to improve productivity, and we're going to increase revenues and profits in 3 years. And return greater value to shareholders. Well, Paul O'Neill said none of those things. All he wanted to talk about during this press conference was worker safety. And that his main job as CEO of Alcoa was to improve worker safety. All the financial experts in the room were scratching their head, and they said, oh my God, this guy's going to last less than 6 months, and we'll be doing this all over again. But he knew something that no one else did. He reflectively understood this notion that Duhigg talks about in the book called a keystone habit. That if you can focus on one thing in your organization, almost to exclusion, and adhere to the habit cycle, you can bake new processes into your organization, and those new processes can have a spider web effect on the rest of the organization. So what did he do? He created a cue. He told his executives and the entire company that any time there was a safety incident anywhere in the company around the globe, that he needed to be notified personally within 24 hours with a plan to fix and remedy that safety incident so it never happens again. That was the routine. So what happened was people didn't think he was serious until he ended up firing some of his post-lieutenants in the executive suite. Oh, this guy really means business. And promoting others who effectively did what he had asked. He even gave his phone number to all the employees and said, if you see a safety incident or you know a way to improve safety in the organization, please email me or contact me back then personally. So all of a sudden, he's creating new routine. A cue, routine. And rewards and punishments that go with it. A carrot is a positive reward, a stick or punishment is a negative reward. Both can be effective. Within 6 months, he had turned Alcoa around, because when you fix processes that lead to safety incidents, you fix a lot of things in the organization that are inefficient, ineffective. So this had this tremendous ripple effect that snowballed and made Alcoa turn around from a negatively performing organization to a positively performing organization in very little time. So, point of the keystone habit, start small, stay focused. We've seen examples of this, like with British Airways. And their CEO back in the days focused on-time flights to exclusion of almost all of them. All right, so when I put this presentation together, I leafed through my book and realized that all these leaders talked about change. And if you boil down their prescriptions for change, it came to these three things. First, you need to educate people. You need to tell them what's going to change, how it's going to affect them, and what's expected of them. In other words, rationalize the change so they can understand it. The second thing you need to do is incent people. Because we humans, we go where we're incented, okay? So they had to change, most of these folks changed or tinkered with the incentive structure to promote the behavior that they wanted. And third, you had to orchestrate. And this means change the fundamental processes, the routine or the habit, if you will, until it was baked into the DNA of the company. And this is how things got done. So after I came up with that kind of framework, I read this book called Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath. And as I read that book, I realized, no, they were talking about the same three things, but slightly different language. Instead of education, they talked about you have to appeal to people's heads. Instead of incentives, you have to appeal to their heart, to their emotions, to their gut feel. Because just knowing things is not enough to make the change. You have to kind of feel it, experience it, see it, touch it, taste it. And finally, he said you have to appeal to the herd. You have to change the herd if you want to change the company. There's this great research study that Amy O'Connor, one of my analytical leaders, mentioned in her quest to change how Nokia did business, changing from a manufacturer of cell phones to a manufacturer of data services. And the research was about how do you get kids to eat peas. Now, if you're a parent, I'm sure you've gone through this in some shape or form. Now, the research hypothesized that there are three ways to get kids to eat peas. You can persuade them about how good peas are for you. They'll make you tall and strong. You can bribe them with ice cream if they eat their peas, which obviously counteracts the healthy effects of the peas, but nonetheless, you can bribe them. And finally, you can coerce them. You can force them to eat their peas or punish them if they don't. So they did some research studies and they tested these three models, and guess what they found was the most effective? The takers?
All three.
Bribery. Well, it turns out that none of those techniques work. Then they came on to something. They found something that did work. To get your kids to eat peas, what you do is you put them with a bunch of kids who like to eat peas. And then your kids will eat those peas. You change the herd. If you can change the herd, change is almost instantaneous. Just like when I went to Ireland and came back with an Irish rep. Changing the herd has a huge impact on your organization. So how do you do that? That's interesting. Amy O'Connor at Nokia, she took the few folks who were already using data to create data services, and she amplified what they were doing through marketing and social media. Others, like Ken Rudin, changed his herd, got rid of folks who couldn't do what he was asking them to do or didn't want to do, and brought in folks who would. Let's talk about Kelley Blue Book. This is from Dan Engold, one of the analytical leaders in my book. He joined Kelley Blue Book in 2005. At the time, the company was going through a lot of change. You may know Kelley Blue Book is a provider of values for new and used cars. And its website, which was just emerging in 2005, was really good. I recommend, before you buy any car, you go there. But at that time in 2005, guess how they were creating those values that they published monthly? Originally in a blue book, paper-bound blue book. They had these quote-unquote valuations analysts who were very experienced in the industry, had a lot of contacts in the industry. And every month or so, they kind of, call around to their contacts, see what was going on, look at some data that had come through, put their finger up in the air, and write down a value for every car that they were responsible for, in about 5 major models. That's how it was done pre-2005. Now, when Dan came in, the executives already knew that the business was changing, and they had to change with it. They knew, one, it was going to the web, and two, that these values were going to have to be more analytically generated, statistically generated. And Dan, along with a new director of analytics that they run, helped move them in that area, to that direction. Dan provided the data as the head of data warehousing and BI, and this new analytics director, who worked closely with Dan, provided the analytical horsepower in the form of statisticians and data scientists. So they created this new team of statisticians. They brought in about a half dozen to start. And, this is the right thing to do. But can you imagine the impact on the evaluations analysts that bringing in a new team of statisticians to generate the values that they had always produced would have? This is a potential disaster in the making, right? These folks feel threatened that these statisticians are going to replace them and take their jobs from them. And it became very quickly an us versus them mentality. Or it could have become, if Dan and Kelley Blue Book didn't adhere to these change management techniques that we're talking about. So what did Dan do? That's Dan right there. He educated people. He had the statisticians train the evaluations analysts, who are already kind of analytical in nature, about the nature of creating an analytical model. How you feed data to the model, which models or algorithms you choose, how you combine algorithms, trim outliers, select variables, and then keep tweaking the output until it's more accurate. Conversely, he had the evaluations analysts train the statisticians about the nuances of the business. And both groups were trained by Dan's team, who was out there trying to find many new sources of data, from auction houses to dealerships, and so on, where they could use to drive these analytical models from. So there's a lot of education and training. The second thing they did was incent. They changed the incentive structure. And the brilliant thing they did is to say, all right, analysts and statisticians, we're going to give you the same incentives for your bonuses. You are both incented on the accuracy of the values that get published in the Blue Book, now on the website. And we're going to pay particular attention to certain values that get, where the statistical value is overridden by the evaluation. So now they had incentive to work together to come up with the most accurate valuations possible. The more accurate they were, the bigger a bonus. So now, when evaluation analysts came across a model, they were incented that they didn't quite understand or agree. They were incented to talk to the statisticians about how they got that, and vice versa. And finally, on the orchestrate phase, they did something that was also brilliant. They didn't create a new process. They actually kept the same one, because there's enough change instilled into the system already. So they said, you know what, valuations analysts, we're not going to change what you do. You are still responsible and accountable for publishing that value, you alone. So we're not taking that away, your job's not going away, your responsibility stays the same. You just use these statistics as a tool to help you deliver more accurate value. And this worked brilliantly. All of a sudden, instead of viewing these statisticians as a threat, they began viewing them as an asset. And they began to get more accurate, and they became more productive, and they freed them up to do more stuff they couldn't do before. Today, Kelley Blue Book, instead of publishing monthly values, in 5 regions, they publish weekly values in 51 regions. Instead of for a handful of cars, now they publish those values for 20,000 cars and trucks, with almost infinite numbers of options and combinations of options available. So the productivity skyrocketed. In fact, Dan said that they were now 15 times more productive than they were before. So it's a true success story of how to use change management to create a potentially negative situation into a positive. Let me just stop there, because I'm actually a little bit ahead of time. Any questions or comments so far? I think it's straightforward.
How long was that transition? Months? Years?
Well, Dan came in 2005. They brought in statisticians pretty soon after that. I talked to him in 2011, so about 5 years. At the same time, Dan also changed the company's development processes from waterfall to agile, which is a whole other story. All right, let's talk about Ken Rudin. Actually, the problem with writing a book about successful people is that before I even finished the manuscript, they all changed jobs. They all got moved away to some other company. Let's have to start over. Ken was head of analytics at Zynga when I interviewed him. And then soon after that, became head of analytics at Facebook. And now he's head of analytics at Google. I mean, come on, it's the biggest analytic jobs in the world right there. This guy's had 3 of them, you know? So he's kind of like the guru of analytics in Silicon Valley. But he doesn't have data science training. He's actually a product marketer at Oracle and Siebel Analytics. Actually was an instructor at TWI for many years, teaching parallel compute processing, or parallel database processing. But anyway, Ken's kind of the hero of the book. He came up with all these little aphorisms to talk about how to do analytics the right way. Things like being an evangelist, not an oracle, focus on impacts, not insights, focus on the questions, not the answers. These were things that he kept saying to his team of analysts, which were quantitative folks who sat with him centrally at Zynga when I interviewed him, to try to drive home what kind of analytical culture he wanted to create. So let's go through these. The first is being an evangelist, not an oracle. At Zynga, he kind of thought it was weird that if any of the design studios making these games, and these were Facebook games at the time, like Farmville and Mafia Wars and Treasure Island, the design studios were full of all these creative people, programmers, coming up with these great ideas. And if they had an analytical question, they would then walk down the hall and kind of fill out a form with Ken's team to say, hey, we want you guys to answer this question. And Ken kind of likened this to being the Oracle at Delphi, right? So at the Oracle of Delphi, if you have a question about the future, you come to the Oracle of Delphi, you ask the question, and then the Oracle will pontificate, provide you the answer, right? And Ken thought, this seems strange that they have to come to us. It seems like we should be going to them. We're going to create a culture of analytics. We need to change things around. I mean, if you think about a gaming company, and like a lot of companies these days, even those with tangible goods, the data is almost as important as the product itself. You could argue in a gaming company, it is more important. In fact, Ken did tell me once that, we're really, we're really an analytics company masquerading as a gaming company or as a publishing company. The data is that important to the company. And now we're in Detroit, and I was actually at Cloudera earlier in the week, and they have had a lot of conversations with automobile manufacturers who are feeling a little bit under the gun from, guess who? Silicon Valley companies like Apple, Google, and Amazon, who are instrumenting their cars with mobile connectivity and all this data generating stuff. And guess who's keeping the data? Not the auto manufacturers, it's the software manufacturers. And now I think the automobile makers are waking up to realize, oh my God, I think we just gave away the baby. That data is going to be a good part of our future. Anyway, so Ken did a very radical thing when he got to Zynga and figured this out, that this kind of Oracle Delphi approach wasn't going to create the analytical culture he thought the company needed. He gave up all his direct reports. He took his hat and he went to each of the heads of the design studios and said, hey, how would you like an analyst on your team instead of on my team? You have to pay for his salary, or her salary. And he was actually surprised that he was fully subscribed. All his analysts were taken. And so Ken went from running a centralized analytical team to the head of a dispersed team. They actually reported directly to the lines of business. But they still met with Ken on a daily basis for stand-up, or weekly basis for stand-up meetings. And he set their performance objectives every quarter. So it's kind of a dotted line relationship. And he used this habit cycle when he sent his analysts off into the wilderness to be part of these design studios. He said, when any of these creative types ask a question or have a great idea for a new feature to add to the game, that's your cue. When you hear that new idea proposed, raise your hand. Okay, this is part of the habit. Raise your hand and say, hey, that's a great idea. Let's test it. Because before that time, and throughout much of the gaming industry in Silicon Valley as a whole, and e-commerce sites as a whole, they didn't do this. They didn't have the notion of A/B testing. You test the feature before you put it out there to the general public to see if it has the desired consequences. It has the desired lift. It changes behavior in the way you want it to. But at this point in time, that was completely novel. Now it's become standard practice. So, you're an idea, raise your hand, let's test the hypothesis. Ken had his team of engineers that still remain with him, create an A/B testing platform, reasons to have it. And guess what? They realized that some of these features were terrible. Instead of having the desired effect, they had the opposite effect. With that data in hand, the executives made A/B testing a standard operating procedure of the company before they released any new feature into the public. Cue, routine, reward, change the habit. Not only at Zynga, but really this now is standard way of doing things for any web company, as I said. Okay, focus on impacts, not insights. These analytical types working for Zynga are very smart, and they love to generate new insights using very sophisticated algorithms and things like that. But Ken kept running into this issue where his analysts were spending all this time coming up with insights that the business never adopted. So he started saying to folks, hey guys, it's not the insight that counts, it's the impact on the business that counts. So don't just give me random insights to show how clever you are. Give me insights the business will adopt. I don't care if it's written on the back of the napkin. If it moves the needle, that's a good insight. Now he said this in session, but it didn't really seem to take hold. So he did another provocative thing. He changed their incentives. It used to be that they were incented on insights, and guess what? they generated insights, right? Now he said, when the design studio that you're embedded in, when they set their quarterly goals, that's going to be your goal. Whether it's to raise player longevity in a game by 3% in South America for mobile phone games, that's your performance goal as well. And of course, the analysts didn't quite like this, right? Their initial response was, wait, how can you hold us accountable for decisions that we can't make? We can bring these guys the best insights in the world, but if they don't adopt them, you're essentially punishing us or penalizing us for their intransigence. And Ken said, oh, well, that's tough. Think about a salesperson, right? They can cultivate account, they can make all the calls, they can say the right thing, bring the right collateral, but if they don't get the sale, do they get the commission? No. So Ken got his way, and funny thing happened. These analysts who were resistant to this actually began to like it because they changed the insights they generated to ones that they thought that the business would adopt. And when they did, they had the satisfaction knowing that they helped move the needle. So their satisfaction, job satisfaction, increased tremendously. They felt more vested in the process. So this was a really important breakthrough. The other thing that became very clear is that there were some analysts who were really good at persuading the business to adopt their insights, and some weren't. And Ken now says, when I hire analysts now, it's not solely based on their quantitative skills. In fact, I hire as much for their communication skills and their powers of persuasion as their analytical skills. If you don't have the soft skills, the people skills, the communication skills, you're almost worthless to me as an analyst. So we started hiring more analysts who came out of, say, product marketing in a technology, who understood the technology, had some analytical skills, but thought in business terms and could communicate to business people in a language they could understand. The last was focus on questions, not answers. And this is a good one. He likes to say that it's easy to get the answers to things. We know how to do that. We just get the data and we plumb through it until we find the right answer. It's asking the right questions. Knowing what to look for in the first place, that's the hard thing. And you see this over and over and again in your companies, in your own lives. We all carry around with ourselves assumptions about how things work. But we never test those assumptions. And a lot of those assumptions are dead wrong. But we don't know it until we pay the price in a big way. So one example, Zynga, was player longevity was a big metric there. And the longer a player plays the game, the more likely they will spend money in the game to buy these virtual goods for $1 a piece. A new rig, or what have you, in Farmville. So they always were trying to design the game. These games were kind of real-time design based on what they saw in the data. They were always designing the game to increase player longevity. Now, the designers had this assumption about what kept people in the game longer. You know what that was? They assumed that the more friends you have in the game, which are like LinkedIn connections or Facebook friends, the more friends you have, the more likely you would play the game longer. And it makes sense, right? A lot of these assumptions make common sense. But Ken said, you know what, let's test that. I don't think it's right. Let's test that assumption. First thing he did, surface the assumption. Hey, this is an assumption, this is not fact. Second thing he did, let's test it. So they tested it. Oh, it's neighbors, not fact. The more neighbors the player has, increases player longevity potentially. And they found out there was actually no correlation between the number of neighbors a person has in the game Farmville and how long they played the game. Bingo. Now they got to go back to the drawing board and redesign the games. They've invested all this time designing around this assumption when it was wrong. They found something, though, that did correlate. It was close, but not the same thing. It wasn't the number of neighbors, it was the degree of engagement with those neighbors. So even if you had just 5 neighbors, if you were engaged with them and interacting with them a lot in the game, that was a correlation with longevity. So one of the things they did, once they understood this assumption, was to do things like, say, in Farmville, if you wanted to raise a barn to house all your animals and crops, you couldn't do it by yourself. You had to enlist your neighbors to help you. So they designed the game to increase engagement. Use analytics to test hypotheses. So Ken, without knowing it, was a master of change management. He educated people with these pithy aphorisms. He incented them by changing their business goals and performance goals. He orchestrated new processes using cues to change habits. And he hired new people, the right people, and basically changed his herd to get the outcomes that he wanted. So these are the secrets again. You know, be a purple person, just to wrap up here. I only have a few minutes for questions. Deliver value fast, partner with the business. What we focused on today was managing change and how important that is. Whether you're just introducing a new report, you're putting out an upgrade of a new tool, you're adding subject areas to the data warehouse, whatever change you're foisting on the business, you have to realize that there's going to be resistance to that. And you need to have a strategy, a change management plan, that hopefully adopts and implements these 3 best practices: educate, incent, orchestrate. Appeal to the head, appeal to the heart, and appeal to the herd. If you want true change now. If you want people to adopt what you're doing in the field, think of those 3 things. Okay. So that's me. This book is available out there at the WIC desk if you are interested. So, any questions? One second. I'm just going to wait here until someone raises their hand. So it's all perfectly clear?
Who's your next interviewee?
Who's my best interviewee?
The next one.
Oh, the next one? Well, you can see here that I'm supposed to be writing this book on data governance. I actually did all the interviews 2 years ago. And then I foolishly started a business called Eckerson Group. It's a research consulting company. And it's made me put the book on the back burner, unfortunately. So once I get some free time, I will put that to rest hopefully. Data governance is a huge issue. Every company, you know, every company you go into is struggling with data governance. We'll talk a little bit about that in my keynote later today. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, what type of consultant is this company? Yeah. Well, we can talk about that offline, but we focus on BI analytics, policy strategy. Yes?
So would you have any form of a different strategy when you are trying to make a culture shift to data governance? So that impacts the corporation across all lines. IT and business have to join together to be successful. Any advice on how to perpetuate that culture shift?
Yeah, so how do you make data governance stick in an organization? Because it doesn't stick very easily, does it? The business wants to do this. We got 1 minute. The business wants to do this. It says they want it. The top executive will talk the talk, but they will walk the walk. People will not find time to sit on a data governance committee until it's in their vested interest. Until they have an incentive, which means there's a big project, like a new CRM rollout, that they're on the hook for, and you convince them that unless they have clean, consistent data, that CRM investment is going off and on. They have incentive and a stick to do data governance. So I find the best data governance starts with a strategic project that's dependent on information, clean, consistent information. Then you work from there. Unless you're in a financial services company that's heavily regulated and your executives will go to jail. Well, that's an incentive of the negative type, right?
That's the stick I use.
That's the stick.
Exactly. And I am in financial services.
Yeah. You make a big poster with that stick, front and center. Jail,
Well,
Okay, it looks like I've got 0 minutes remaining, so thank you all for your attention.